And we've seen a lot of different pictures, videos, and people have seen firsthand account of the impacts on not only the beaches, the lagoons, the corals, which really show that this is an ecological nightmare.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide. This is the show where we help you understand complex energy topics through storytelling. This is our very first episode in our brand new season. So glad to have you join us on this brand new adventure we're setting up on. On this very first episode, we'll be focusing on an issue that's very close to our hearts. Today we'll be talking about the recent oil spill that happened in the island nation of Mauritius. This episode will be divided into two parts. Mainly because it's a very heavy topic, I want to make sure it's as easy as possible for you to get the facts and to listen all the way to the end. This episode will help you understand how interconnected energy is in every aspect of our lives, and hopefully to help you see this event as a much broader consequence of our current energy systems. With that said, let's meet our guests and get into the conversation for today.
So my name is Yuvan Beejadhur. I'm a Mauritian citizen, and I'm very passionate about the oceans and the broader sustainability agenda. And in terms of my professional career, I'm a global expert on the sustainable blue economy area. As you may know, the ocean economy, the blue economy, has become quite an important topic over the last few years, especially that now the global community has decided on having a dedicated sustainable development goal, the number 14, on the oceans, fisheries, and maritime resources. And I also teach a course at the university in Geneva on as a visiting professor on blue diplomacy and marine governance. In my previous careers, I've worked in a number of United Nations and World Bank capacities, most recently as a World Bank expert on the blue economy, where I've co-managed or managed a number of teams and studies and analytical work, advisory services, programmatic work across different regions of the world. And this incident that we'll discuss with you is one of particular importance for me because it's really a great example of the challenges and opportunities that exist around the oceans, maritime domains, sustainability, the blue economy, and the the opportunities as well. Because I think that there's some lessons to be learned from this.
Mm. And as an expert working on covering the oceans and working with the World Bank and the UN at some point, did you ever expect that you would have to work on something so close to home? Was that something that you ever saw coming?
Well, I left the bank with the objective of returning to Mauritius and trying to bring some new ideas and inject some new blood in our current country in terms of the political system, the economics, the sustainability agendas. And when I returned to Mauritius in 2017, after having spent close to 19 years abroad as either a student or a working professional, having lived a bit in Paris, Geneva, New York, Washington, and traveled the world, I felt that I had quite something to give to the country back. And over the last few decades, Mauritius has done really well in terms of a small island in Africa that has become now a high income nation. But I always felt, and I think a lot of Mauritians have felt it, the environment, the ecology, the natural capital has not always been part of that equation. Even if sometimes you would think of Mauritius as being a paradisiac island with a beautiful ocean, the postal card in a way, the environment has never really been there in terms of our economic development. So one reason for my engagement in Mauritius was to elevate that, to say that Mauritius's future has to depend on its environment, on its natural capital. And if we don't protect it, it's going to be a dustbin economy, to say the least. And in terms of the of my of whether I thought that would have happened, yes, I believe that somewhere somehow I felt that these kind of incidents would have happened because again, I think just like many Mauritians, I'm quite disappointed that the political system is often blocked. It's the same ways of handling the economy, the governance. People allow themselves to be governed in a way which doesn't suit them in the end. And at the end, the whole country loses out. So we need a new way of handling our national affairs and our international affairs. And that's why I also launched Enforce Maurice, which was a grassroots citizens movement to also address some of those issues. But it's an honor to work for one's country. I have to say, I'm particularly honored to provide some solutions. But it has to add up, and that's why we need the whole country to rally behind some national, bold, transformative agendas. The blue economy is one of them, and I feel that so far it's still been a small um, a small topic, a small agenda. It hasn't really been at the top of the political decision. So I would like to see that. And in terms of the spill, I think Mauritius, we knew that Mauritius was always at risk for these kind of incidents. We've had it in the past with Benito. We've had it with other oil spills, but it's never been to that scale and to that to how grand of a scale that was. It wasn't that as bad. And but we learn from experience. We know that the biggest risks in the world is when we don't know the risks that we are incurring around us. And I think Mauritius somehow knew that with so many ships crossing around, that it was at risk for these kind of spills. But why did it not act on time? Why did it not make some key decisions at that point? These remain to be seen.
And I guess since we're already there, let's just go into the background of this. Could you just walk us through the events that led up to the oil spill and how exactly did it happen that a tanker that holding about 4,000 tons of crude oil could manage to be in a position to leak out all its content in such a short amount of time? How does something like that happen?
Right. Absolutely, and I think a lot of Mauritians and global experts are also asking questions about this. So the MV Wakashio, which is a basically a large capsized bulk carrier coming from China to Brazil, as we understood, and flying under a Panamanian flag of convenience, um, even if it's a Japanese owned company, was basically running towards Brazil from China. And at the time of its grounding, the ship was basically sailing without cargo. And it had left Lianyungang in China on around July 4th. It had made a stop in Singapore, and it was supposed to reach Brazil in Tubarão on August 13. What we do know also then that initially the Wakasha was not leaking any oil. That oil began to leak around the 6th of August, by which time the Mauritian authorities and government and citizens were trying to then isolate this kind of oil spill. Now, when it did basically hit, um, it basically hit the coral reefs of Mauritius around July 25th, around um, the exact time I think it was around 16 hours UTC. So, the ship was carrying around 3,000, probably more, tons of oil, and 1,000, as we know, had been diverted into the ocean, making it one of the worst ecological, environmental, and possibly economic disaster for at least a short period of time in Mauritius. Um, the government reports mentioned that they had tried to communicate with the boat, but as you know, this is also a very large. This is a very large boat and a very sort of impressive one as well. We were also told that the captains were not reachable. They had not reached the National Coast Guard of Mauritius. And these basically 12 days that the ship was stranded, the authorities had started looking for help, as we understand. through salvage companies whose sole purpose, as you may know, is to just put the ship back on track, not to touch on the ecological aspect. And I think maybe perhaps that this could have also been an area which was not entirely clear as to whether the authorities understood all of this on time and whether the chain of command went all the way to the right people on time. And so the government had declared this crisis an environmental emergency, and on August 7 had requested the help from the government of France, of which President Macron famously tweeted as well, that he would be indeed helping Mauritius and that we can count on his support. So military equipment, civilian equipment, personnel from neighboring La Réunion came, but all in all, it's Mauritian citizens, volunteers from different backgrounds, different parts of the island, who basically mobilized really quickly together with NGOs, local based NGOs, local fishermen, local coastal communities, to really put down a sort of cloth barriers stuffed with straws from sugarcane plantations, human hair, etc., to really build those booms as well to really contain those oil. So that was, I think, a global image of solidarity, of citizens acting up, of decisions being taken by people themselves, and that was quite impressive itself. Now, following that, of course, and we can discuss that. I think the damage was quite consequential, and obviously we can talk of a lot of things: negligence. We can talk of the country not being entirely prepared, or maybe decisions being not taken on time, a failure of a responsibility to protect. There's a number of ways we could look at it as to where potentially the liability, the responsibility lies partially on the boat, the captain, the company, the owner, and also the government. But having said that, what we do know in terms of facts is that this shipwreck could not have happened in the worst possible place, in the sense that, the area of Pointe Desny, the area of Blue Bay Marine Park, Île aux Aigrettes, all that area are really known to the biodiversity community. They are recognized by the Ramsar Convention, of which Mauritius is a member and ratified in 2011. So these are areas which really are critical to ecosystem, to the natural capital, to the marine life. It's a very rich marine life of dolphins, whales, porpoises, um, you know, different types of algae, different types of fish. It's impressive for divers. So to have such a collapse of a vessel with so much oil in this area is very, very disturbing. And we've seen a lot of different pictures, videos, and people have seen firsthand account of the impacts on not only the beaches, the lagoons, the corals, seagrass, mangroves. There's been, beaches and dunes and mudflats, and which really show that this is an ecological nightmare.
I just want to quickly go back to two things that you mentioned. First was the response from the community, which is amazing on itself. But you mentioned earlier that there is no much of the expertise needed to kind of deal with the ecological damage that comes with an oil spill. And then you also mentioned things like makeshift solutions that or remedies that citizens are coming up with. You mentioned some sugar cane stalks, human hair, and just trying to make their own albums. Like, how effective are these solutions, and what exactly does constitute into cleaning up an oil spill?
Yeah, so there is experience from a number of oil spills, whether it be the ones in that have happened in France, Erica, or you've had the BP one in New Mexico. You have the Gulf War. There's a lot of different kinds of oil spills that have happened throughout the world at different times, near South Africa, etc. So, and even recently as well, in Venezuela, and elsewhere. So I think the experience of these kind of incidents exists. Mauritius was aware of this. We've sent, I mean, the government had sent Mauritian environmental officers and officials to recent conferences in East Africa where they've learned about these kind of spills. But even prior to that, we have had a oil spill contingency plan of the 90s, which perhaps was not entirely updated, but of which they were aware of. Mauritius had experience with other oil spills, the Benito, for example. With much less material, we had managed to do better. Of course, it was less oil as well, but there were lessons learned over there. Now, having said that, I think no small island in the world, from the developing world, are entirely ready for these kind of crises. And I mean it when I say that, because I think there are some small islands which are not developing, whether it be smaller, such as bigger than Mauritius, but still smaller than other larger islands. The United Kingdom is an island. Ireland is an island. New Zealand, even Australia is a gigantic country, but it you know there are countries which are surrounded by the ocean, which have experience in these kind of incidents, which Mauritius needs, I think, to tap into moving forward. Number two, local solutions are good, but they're not to the scale that we need. To really get the oil out, you need to pump it out. It's as simple as that. And that had to be done the day that the ship was wrecked. Now, the authorities, of course, gave the reason that the weather was not so great, that the experts who had come at that point, but as we understand it, these experts were sent by the shipping company. So I think it may have raised also potential conflicts of interest, right? When a ship collapses, you may want to have a broad array of expertise around, not just the company's shipping experts, to avoid precisely those types of conflict of interest. So I think the local solutions were good in the very 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 short term, but they could not have possibly replaced professional experience from companies that exist to do precisely that, to pump out the oil and clean up the spill. Because right now, what we know is that these oils may have dissolved in the water. We have seen around 40 dolphins stranded and sort of dead on our shores over the last few days. This is a very disturbing scene. These are the animals that represent harmony, balance, protection. Everybody loves the dolphins. They're charismatic. To see them dead on our shores around the areas of the oil spill raises very, very serious questions as to what exactly happened. Did they swallow those oil? Is it possible that they were disoriented? Is it possible that it was a combination of issues, such as, because we also know that the boat eventually was scuttled, right? So and sunk all the way to the bottom. And could military explosives have been used? Could there have been military exercises around there? Who knows? So there are a lot of questions that are being raised as to these species being dead. And what's really needed now is for the government to be entirely transparent about this. We still don't know exactly what had happened prior to the boat hitting there. What was the state of mind of the crew? What are the certificates of the boat saying? There are reports that the certificates were not entirely up to date. So we have heard one excuse, or one rationale, that the sailors had come to Mauritius to look for Wi-Fi, that there was a party on the boat. But these don't entirely sound credible to the average Mauritian. So we want to know the truth. We want the government to be entirely transparent. We want civil society to be part of those investigations. And I think these are the rationale and the raison d'être of democratic societies.
I want to go to 2 points that I think are very important factors here. You mentioned about the ecological effects on the marine life, and also about Mauritius being a developing island. And I think those two things kind of play together because Mauritius obviously depends on tourism a lot, and the tourism industry has already been impacted by the pandemic with travel restrictions going around and people not flying as much and not going to holiday destinations. And now with this oil spill, how is it going to affect long term?
Right. Well, as you know, Mauritius had, over the last few decades, had done well in terms of a country that has moved away from a monocrop industry of sugar exportation to the EU and other countries, to a country which has become much more diversified in terms of its economy. We are now classified by the World Bank as a high income country. And that means that, we have made substantive changes and reforms to be able to get into that group of countries that are making, more than other countries in terms of its GDP per capita. So that was an economic objective of the country. Tourism, of course, has played an incredibly important role into that. You know, Mauritius, as you know, is often the preferred destination of European tourists, depending on the season. Increasingly, we've had Chinese, African, and Indian, and elsewhere tourists over the last few years. Mauritius has, because it had something to sell. We have pristine lagoons, beautiful oceans, blue sea, and of course sunny weather, and a very peaceful and calm country with a very authentic and very nice historical um, and cultural history around it. We are a mix of people who come from all parts of the world: India, Southern Asia, China, Pakistan, parts of Pakistan, East Africa, West Africa, Europe, and over the years, communities have lived mostly very, very comfortably well next to each other. And of course, one of the biggest sectors in our country is tourism. And as a sector, this has provided thousands and thousands of jobs over the last decades. To see the COVID-19 crisis impact our economy, where we are thinking that around 6% of our GDP will be contracted just because of the COVID-19, when we're going to get into a unemployment rate of around eight, moving from 6 to 18% of unemployment just because of the COVID. It makes us question as to what can we do different. So tourism would have been that sector which could have saved Mauritius a little bit more in the medium term. But with this crisis of Wakasha, where now, thanks to satellites from the US or from Finland, we've been able to see that the spill has indeed increased from a little bit more than 3 kilometers square to 27 kilometers uh, over a period of a few days, which means that this spill is not a small one. It's consequential, which also means that whoever would have come to Mauritius because it was a COVID-19 safe country, because we had made quite a good strand and we had managed to beat the corona, thanks to the population and the government, taking very strong and serious measures, sometimes at the discontent of people. We had managed to win that. That's going to be lost. No tourist is going to come to Mauritius because of this coronavirus, because of the Wakasho. That's the fear that many tourist operators are having. That's what I also fear. Now, having said that, we need to be able to not only clean up the country, we need to advertise the other parts of the country which are still safe, which haven't been impacted by the spill. But as you know, because of currents and waves and weather patterns, the oil spill can move. It's probably dissolved part of it, and it moves around, and it probably goes in other parts of the country. Let's hope not, but that's a possibility. So all in all, I would say that there's a huge task ahead for policymakers in Mauritius to ensure that the tourism industry, which probably accounts to a bit more than 25% and probably more because of indirect impacts, basically could be solved and could be revived very quickly and in a very different and smart way. And I think moving forward, Mauritius needs to modernize. It cannot depend only on tourism. It has to become, in my view, a highly sophisticated island. It can do that. We need to invest a lot in the blue economy. Some of my work at the World Bank with my colleagues, we found out that Mauritius will need around $580 million of investment per year for the next 15 to 18 years to double the current share of the ocean economy, which is currently at 12%, to make it become 25%, which would help diversify the economy and create good paying jobs. We need to do that very quickly. We need to be able to invest much more in research and development. Mauritius can become a beacon for Africa in terms of that link between Asia and Africa, a route, a hub, and maximize from the current potential of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, where the World Bank has estimated that trade can be leveraged to the amount of around $460 billion. Mauritius needs to be part of that success story. But that means investing much more in research and development and high skilled labor, which we haven't really done over the last decades, because also we are a country which has a high debt to GDP. Around 65 to 70% of our debt is linked to our GDP, right? So that means that we don't have that fiscal space to do the kind of reforms or investments that we need. So we will have to look for those investors from outside, from also local private sector Mauritians, but also the diaspora. We need to set up a diaspora bond. Mauritians want to contribute back to the country, but they can't vote. So they want to be able to also be part of that democratic political process. And Mauritius, because it's a safe country, it's peaceful, it's strategically located, it has the idea of also expanding its port. There could be good options and good pathways for us to maximize the global trading environment right now. Just to give you an example of how and why Mauritians are upset. 2 days ago, because of all these dolphins, Mauritians have asked the Minister of Shipping, Blue Economy, Marine Resources, fishing, what really happened. And the minister, without even waiting for a proper investigation, basically just gave a very defensive line saying, well, I heard that something along the lines of, I heard that it has nothing to do with the oil. Now, as a minister, first you have to be guided by science, by numbers, by data, by research-based evidence. You cannot possibly make up something like this. We had another minister of the ocean economy who also said that he doesn't think that there is any whale in our lagoons. And this is a minister of the blue economy. So this is just to give you an example that too often we have allowed a system to permeate where people who have no or just very basic knowledge of a particular sector, as a way to reward these people for having stood in the elections and to have brought basically electoral voters, they are rewarded to become the highest decision-making persons in policy-making space. That has to stop. That absolutely has to stop, because at the end of the day, Mauritians and people around the world will lose out to these kind of decisions. And that's why I think Mauritius has a long way to go. Being a high-income nation doesn't mean anything. Being the number one in Africa, always ahead of Botswana or Nigeria on some issues, or the economy or GDP per capita, does not mean anything if we don't invest in our greatest capital, which is our people, and also invest in our natural capital upon which our economy depends on. So these are the questions, these are the intersections and those areas that I'm personally very interested in, to see to it that a new breath of fresh air, a new space of new-blooded people with new ideas, with tested ideas, with ways of changing the methods of governance, whether it be on our marine economics, whether it be on marine spatial plans, whether it be on leveraging new kinds of creative investments, blue bonds, whether it be about our political system to make sure that there's more transparency in our finances. We introduced a trace your finance initiative last year to really try to see how that, how your taxes are being used. These are the type of ideas we've introduced in our group Enforce Maurice to put some pressure, challenge, not to criticize, but to show that there is a path out there that we need to adopt some of those tested solutions.
This is all very revealing, and it's making me very curious. What do you expect the permanent or lingering effects to be, just from the ecological standpoint and also political as well? Because I think these two factors will play very closely in the next few months as this case continues to unravel.
Right. So as I would say, I would now repeat it. The wrecking of this flag, the MV Wakasho, uh, did leak in one of the most biodiverse rich areas of Mauritius. It is an ecological disaster in that sense. And so, as you know, every Mauritian loves the ocean. I mean, when I was growing up in Mauritius, I would always go to some of those beaches with my grandmother, my parents, and we would eat, a little piece of bread with some sardines and drink a Pepsi Cola. And, I would look at the oceans and I would see, wow, what a beautiful country we come from. This is an impressive island. And over the years, I've always sort of come back to Mauritius and gone back to these beaches. But over the years, I've seen that, the state of our lagoons have depleted. The quality of our fish has gone from very good to less good. I have seen that, and that's also due to a number of other reasons as well, climate change, pollution, um, IUU, etc. But I also feel that, you know we haven't invested enough in our ecosystems and our ecosystem services. So because of this as well, we have become very, very vulnerable to exogenous factors such as oil spills coming from outside. So the biodiversity community, I think, was entirely shocked about this crisis. Um, the impacts have been very visible. As I've said, there's been very dark oil floating on our shores, on our lagoons, on our beaches. Um, we have seen also that it's happening in areas which are very rich in biodiversity, Île aux Aigrettes, Point d'Esny, um, Mayberg. These are areas which are very diversely rich, and we see whales, dolphins, sea turtles, seabirds, a lot of different sea life. Now, the viscosity and the emulsification probably also means that a number of seabirds, turtles, and other animals will definitely be heavily impacted, and their weight will be basically crushed by this kind of materials. They won't be able to breathe properly. They won't be able to swim properly. They'll have to move because of this oil crisis. They will be exhausted. They're going to tire very quickly, and as a result, many of them will drown. So what we're seeing is a number of these dolphins sort of stranded and dying. If indeed it's linked to this, of course, I'll reserve my judgment on that pending the full investigation. But there are very good reasons to believe that it's the result of this. You'll see also the plumage of many birds will basically be intoxicated. And we know that many, many birds around the world end up dying after rehabilitation. They don't show strong survival rates. Um, Penguins, on the other hand, not that we have them necessarily right here, but those that were sort of affected in South Africa, 2,000 of them a few years ago managed to see a high survival rate. So it depends also on some animals and the quality of oil, how quick was the response, climatic conditions, were they able to leave and run away? It depends, but we know that their food is going to be intoxicated, and those who are, at the top of the both at the top and at the bottom of the animal sort of food chain are going to be impacted. So I would also say that there will be intergenerational impacts as well. So yesterday we saw a video of a dolphin with a baby, and these are mammals. They're just like human beings. They're carrying their babies, and they will be impacted as well. They may also, some of them who are expecting mothers will probably give birth to animals with bone deficiencies and other kinds of malformations. So I think the medium and long term food chain impacts for people and for the environment and for marine life will be impacted. Our corals are going to die, and that's going to take decades to revive, and it's going to cost quite a bit of money in terms of coral rehabilitation. Polyps and the coral reefs and the phytoplanktons which provide oxygen to the world, all these are impacted. The mangroves around are in a terrible state right now. There are some very rare examples of wetland around there, right? So subtropical mangroves forests. There are some really interesting ones, such as the Rhizophora mucronate, which is also, as you may know, which is also very rare. But there's also an even rarer species, the Bruguera gymorrhiza, mud flats and also submangrove belts of pantropical coastal plants. So, and also butterflies around there, the Falanta or the Eurema florocola ceres. These are sites. These are the sites that such species exist. So whenever you have these kind of oil spill and shipwrecks, they are inevitably impacted. And shellfish, starfish, and also the dispersants that may have been used to clean up, with droplets and particles, which are going to sort of also go down in the ocean, will also have a very high impact. And of course, the lasting period is probably more than 10 years, 10 to 20 years. But these are the costs that we would know. But what about the costs that we don't know? Right now, people are breathing all kinds of air. Children are going to school around there. Pregnant mothers are expecting and are around there. Older people, we can imagine all kinds of pulmonary diseases, probably even cancer down the road. What about the water systems, the water management systems? What about the food? I mean, everything is linked. As you know, a blue economy exists also because of a green economy, and vice versa. There is no green economy if there is no blue economy. So the interrelationship between what happens on land and the ocean and vice versa is of capital importance for health authorities to look into. So I'm saying that on one hand, it is a very pessimistic picture of a small island which has shown the inability to critically manage this crisis quickly. 12 days is just too long. The health impacts, the rehabilitation needed, the monitoring, and the sort of the impact assessment. We need to do very quickly a natural disaster risk assessment and also a natural capital one, so we see which ones have been hit. A post-disaster needs assessment as well, I would say, and look at what kind of critical ecosystems need to be restored. We know that some of the experts that have come have experience from an industry oil experience point of view, but less so on restoration. So there are also the costs to our culture, our image as a country, our reputation as a country. These bear costs, which have not and probably will not be quantified in the short term, but which need to be quantified. How do maybe we would have had 1 million tourists next year, but we would have much less now. So how do we quantify those costs? What about our culture, people's heritage, cultural forms of expression, small artisanal fishermen from often, Creole communities going to fish every day. That in itself, that scene has a cultural expression to it. There's a traditional knowledge to it. There's different forms of intellectual property around it, which are not quantified. There's a Mauritian-ness to it. There's an authenticity to it. That has to be valued as well in terms of our broader economic ecosystem. And these are lost. And so I'm hopeful that the authorities will quantify these with the help of experts and also put that in the claim to the Japanese companies and its shareholders.
Thank you for listening to the end. If you listened really early, then part 2 might not be up yet because it's going to go up a few hours after part 1. But once part 2 is up, I hope you consider giving it a listen because we go much deeper into who exactly is to blame for the oil spill and how exactly is the path to recovery going to look like in the case of Mauritius. So thank you so much for joining us on the first episode of the Energy Talk. There are some recommended readings in the description, the show notes of this episode, and also a few links so you can connect with Yuvan if you want to as well. I hope you have a lovely day, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Have a lovely day.